You're listening to Preacher in the Hat Podcast. Lock us in and rip the knob off.
Background action, rolling, and action.
And action.
How many times can you say
And action.
that? And we're going live.
Can we get started? Are we on yet?
Will somebody say something?
Oh, man.
All right. Did you know that when it comes to musical worship, your preference does not matter? We're kicking off a new series tonight, and we will tell you why. But first, as always, we'll get started with the introductions. Across from me, my brother Derek. Next to me, my dad Steve. My name's Eric, and behind the cameras is our man, the five-tool player, if you will, Mr. Chris Sumter. So, good to be with you fellas tonight.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Where we are here in Birmingham, Alabama, the weather is warming up, but it was cool enough this evening, thanks to a heavy rainstorm, for me to put my hoodie on. So
maybe one
God
last
is
time.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one more hoodie for me. We are jumping into a new series, following up our series of stories of transformation, and we are going to be talking about musical worship this evening. And this is a topic that I'm really excited about because I have spent the last Jeopardy music 20 years of my life playing worship music since I started playing drums on our church worship team.
Age 14, were you? Or 15?
In 2003 or 2004 or something like that.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So something that has been near and dear to me for a while. And Derek, I guess you've been doing it about the same amount of time.
That's correct.
Long time. So
And it runs in the family because I was leading worship in the preference of the people I grew up with when I was about 12 years old, 11 years old. A cappella music with a hand in the air, beating time. So it runs in the family.
The blood runs deep.
Getting started early at it.
One of the things when you think about worship or people talk about worship, obviously you can define worship as lots of different ways, or let me say it this way: you can worship in lots of different ways. You can worship God in a bunch of different facets of your with
That's
your
why
whole
we use
life.
the term musical worship.
That is why we use the term musical worship, because if we just talk about worship in general, it could be really hard for me, I think, to target something particular, because when we talk about worship in general, really that's how we're meant to live our whole life. And so you can incorporate everything. And so musical worship, like I said, for me is always something that's been near and dear to my heart. Derek, I wondered if you would start us off this evening with a couple of worship leader stories that sit top of brain for you, some experiences that you had.
Experiences. Is there any limitation to what the story
No.
is about? It had to happen on a Sunday morning, maybe.
Maybe.
I have had I've been in leadership with two separate people who stormed off the stage. One was during a practice. One was about 10 seconds before
The service started.
Yeah. The first time I went after the person and tried to figure out what was going on. The second time didn't. And I prefer the second approach, just FYI. Or I recommend. Oh, no, I'll say this. I recommend the second.
Did you have success when you went after them?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
But that may not have necessarily been what they needed in that moment. The second time, well, obviously for a number of reasons, I didn't chase the guy down. But no, the first and foremost being that we had a countdown clock. I think at I don't know if this was before the countdown clock or not. We've had that going for so long, but so anyways, had to lead worship, so I couldn't necessarily. I wasn't just gonna stop everything and go after the guy. But it also it confirmed some stuff for me, some discernment that I had about that situation.
Yeah. What's the worst thing that's ever happened in the middle of a song?
I've capoed on the wrong fret. That was pretty bad.
English here.
That leads to you playing the song in
Yeah,
the wrong
it leads
key.
to you singing, playing the song in the wrong key, and the rest of the band can't connect with it. So that one's probably just more embarrassing.
What about
You have to stop.
What about whole sound system shutting off in the middle of a song? We've had
Power
that.
went out.
Power went out is not as bad because that affects everyone, including all the lights.
Have we had a power outage or we had a breaker trip maybe?
No, we had somebody bump the off button on like our whole system while we were playing. That's singing on a Sunday
I put
morning.
that so far in the back of my mind. Yeah.
Like, I don't even remember that. So I'm pretty sure I was
that's
there.
the nice thing about stuff like that is that we get to be the ones to remember those
Yeah,
things.
yeah, I think
People
so.
don't really
I
take
don't know
that
that
with
it really
you.
happened, actually.
You're not sure if it does?
I'm not sure if it
100% did.
It did.
100% did.
We can verify. Trust but verify is what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, that absolutely happened. We did put in some guardrails against that there. I know somebody installed like a plexiglass pane in front of the
Right, so that couldn't get bumped.
Yeah.
I remember that. Small church joys,
Yeah, so much of that stuff.
things that it's like mistakes that you have to make before you realize they need to be prevented.
Yeah. You've had the standard stuff like the really loud squealing feedback.
The rogue tambourines and the
Rogue tambourines.
that one's usually not too bad. Anyway.
Yeah. Actually, more often than not, the number of tambourine players that we've had, not on the team, but more often than not, they would be just fine keeping the rhythm. If they can keep the rhythm, I don't really have a problem with it. It's when they have no clue what's going on that is an issue. Because then you get more people who are just like turning around and trying to figure out where that's coming from, and you see all of the.
The worst thing is to have a tambourine player who's doing that and then doesn't know it, or doesn't recognize it, or is not impacted by how other people respond to what they're doing.
Yes,
And then you have to approach them about not being able to do it anymore. Usually that ended up being the pastor who got to do that,
Yes, you did.
i.e. me.
Have fun.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so then this is more of a question for the whole group as we just start to jump into this a little bit further. How would you describe the importance of corporate musical worship?
Describe the importance of it.
Yes.
A lot of times individual worship done in a group setting is more like a performance than it is worship sometimes. It feels like that, at least. Corporate has an idea of we are worshiping God together, and I think there's a power in that there's not in individual worship. I think I'm a people person, so I feed off of what other people are doing too. So when I see them participating fully, hear them participating fully, it's pretty cool for me.
Yeah.
It makes me really want to do it more. So I would say that the power of it is motivating each other to worship. When I hear you singing, it makes me want to sing. When I see you worshiping, it makes me want to worship. When I see your hands in the air, it makes me think about putting my hands in the air, and vice versa. I've both led the way in that, and I've also been led by that. So we get to lead. I think corporate worship means we get to lead each other in worship. And it's not just the worship band doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Dan.
That's a good way to put it.
Hey, to piggyback what you were saying is we went to this past weekend to visit with Jenna Hope in college, and we went to it was in Neville Arena, and it was a church she goes to, and they had all their little churches come, and we were driving home, and my wife said, how did you like that? I said, oh, it's way too many people. I just didn't want to be around that many people. She said, you're going to struggle when we get to heaven. I felt like she bloodied my lips spiritually. You know what I'm saying?
Well, how does she know you're going to struggle when you get to heaven, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like I didn't like a crowd, so to speak, you know? And she was like, well, there's going to be a lot more people in heaven worshiping.
Or unless God puts you in one of those rooms and you think you're the only one there, you know,
right.
Maybe that'll work. Well, corporate worship reminds you are not alone, as we suggested.
But at the same time, I feel like you can kind of get caught up in watching other people and like the presentation of it rather than it being personal to you. You know what I mean? Like I've found that because I'm a people watcher and like, oh, I forgot I'm supposed to be doing this too. You know what I mean? Like, because I mean, especially if you're in and it can go both ways. So if you have someone that's like, they didn't really make the A team. They're like on the junior varsity worship team. I mean, I don't mean to say it like that, but I've been to churches where if you had a voice, you had an instrument and you used it. And then other churches were like, just sing in your chair, but not too loud. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And so I've seen it go both ways where you had to almost try out and be like this, like Nashville singer. But it wasn't like, and then I'm like, what about people who just want to make a joyful noise? You know what I mean? And so, but sometimes when you're in some big kind of churches and you hear people that are like, they literally should be recording for a living. Sometimes you can get caught up in their performance. Yeah. I may be jumping ahead.
No, that's great. You're touching on good stuff.
You were just talking about seeing other people. And I know that's true with you.
When I mean other people, I mean people sitting beside me. I don't mean people at the front.
I got you.
Yeah. Although people at the front can help you too, depending on how they're behaving. If they're not excited about worship, it's a little hard to get excited about it if they're not excited about it. You know? Right. You know, and if you get excited about it and they're not, they don't like you singing with too much gusto, you know. Yeah. You're not following their lead, whatever that means. So.
Well, so the Bible has quite a few examples of worshiping together with other people, and so it would take more than an episode to go through all of those. But as I was going through some of this stuff beforehand, a couple of them that just kind of stuck out with me was the one in Acts 16 where Paul and Silas are in prison, and they've just been chained up or whatever, and it says, about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. Now, what follows shortly after that is the earthquake that broke their chains and whatnot. And then I think the jailer was converted then, I think, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's that part. But they were just sitting there singing, like, and they weren't singing songs that I'm assuming a lot of these people didn't know, you know, but they were listening to them, but they weren't. It doesn't sound like they were catering to them in like their musical selections. It was just them giving praise to God. And then another in which is not necessarily a story or any kind of narrative, but is what David talks about in Psalm. I looked up a few Psalm ones. I think it's 22, where he talks about God, the Lord, inhabiting the praises of His people. And so, if God inhabits the praises of His people as we sing together, like that in and of itself is a perfect reason for us to sing together, because we know the Bible calls for us to meet together, to be together, and so if God inhabits our praises, let's praise Him together.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think it's so easy for us to get caught up in what we think may or may not be happening with musical worship, like when we step into a church. So I hear so many people talk about these days that like making performance accusations of worship, or there's too many lights, there's not enough lights, whatever. That I have a hard time thinking that when I go into a church and there is like a worship set of songs, whatever it is, that it's anyone besides my responsibility how I view that, or how I take that worship, how I view that worship. Because we go into churches and we say, that's not this, like, or it's too loud, or it's not loud enough, or, and I've made all of these assumptions and judgments of it before I've even really set my heart on worshiping along with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I feel like that's something that is just plagues us in the church, because we get so locked in on what something should or shouldn't be, declaring something as performance that might look a little bit performative. And
Let me put that on here.
Wait.
Hold on. Let's go back.
Stop.
Rewind the tape.
We need to make sure.
Rewind the tape. Who was that?
we just talked about this too.
Dad's phone went off. I don't know if the audio caught that, but
I just got a phone call from someone. I haven't gotten a phone call in several years.
He was watching some video.
No,
Dad was on his
watching
Facebook.
videos. I was not watching videos. It was a phone call from my buddy Wally, and I haven't heard from him in years.
Wally. Anyways, sorry to cut that off. We were making a joke about Dad being on his phone during this episode because he never is, but then he went and got it.
We spoke it into existence.
And I might add, in my defense, for good reason this time.
Yeah.
So.
As you were.
Well, I smell what you're cooking.
I'm trying to get back. Yeah, I'm trying.
No, I do smell it. I do smell it.
My apologies.
But there's just something wrong, and it's not all across the board. It's not like everybody's gotten it wrong, but there's something that we're walking into a worship service, and we're trying to and we're thinking about me. So it's too many lights. That's like a concert. Right. Okay. That's like there's too many lights. It's too loud. That's like a concert. All right. I could have that thought walking in. That's a common one. Have I ever worshipped God at a concert?
Yeah.
I have. And so, while if I could walk into a church service and it be a little too much, maybe like a concert in my mind, does that mean I can't worship? Does that mean they're blocking me from worship? I walk into another church and I can't hear squat. Besides maybe the person who's leading the song vocally.
So you're saying it's a bad mix?
No bad mix, no energy. Put that in quotes. Whatever you want to say. Let's say it's got no energy. Okay.
No,
but I can hear the words. I can hear the vocals, and I can see the words on the screen.
I hear what you're saying, and I feel like you're stepping on every single person's toes. I'm asking you, are you ready to go there? That's what I'm asking you.
Let me tell you where the turning point on this was for me. I don't know how many years ago this was, Derek, but you and I were at a leading worship in a very, very small church. For a memorial service. I think it was on like a Saturday.
We need more details.
Several years back.
We need more details. I want some names.
In East Birmingham.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. On the eastern side of Birmingham. That's right. And we led worship and songs that they sung along with as best they could. You could tell they didn't know them, but they loved it. Right? That they were having a blast. They were actually worshiping, and these were not songs that they sing in church every Sunday morning. And this was at a memorial service.
Right.
So that's great. I think that's great. I think it's awesome. It's fantastic. They're jumping in on something that's not normally what they would be accustomed to. Well, then we sit down. And I don't know how much time, how many minutes later, another guy basically stands up from where he was sitting, and he's got this special song that he's going to do. I'm like, oh boy, here we go. Like, what's this going to be like? Your standard, like. It's what a lot of people are thinking when you hear so-and-so's got a special song, right? You're like, okay, all right. And he starts singing, no backing track, no music behind it. He just starts singing. His voice is okay. Pretty good. Not like no pitch problems or anything like that. It's like not the most impressive voice ever, but it's solid. And the more he's singing, like the more everyone else around there is like getting into it and loving it and appreciating it, and I'm like, I don't understand. Like, this is, okay. And I didn't necessarily hear exactly from like specific words from the Holy Spirit, but like the feeling was like, to me was like, what's different? How's this different from what you and Derek just led to what he's doing? Like, okay, well, I can say a lot of things musically, like just maybe energy wise for sure. Like we had instruments going, whatever, but God's like, praise is praise. Worship is like, worship is worship. He's not holding a guitar. So what? He means it. And I don't get to and even if I didn't know he meant it, I don't get to decide whether he meant it or not because I don't know.
Now take that concept you just talked about and swing that pendulum all the way over to the other side. That God chose to be in that place, in that moment, and allowed that praise for him to inhabit. Could he not do the opposite? Could someone get up and sing and not have any of that? They're just performing. And God says, I'm out of this. Is that also possible? Because I've experienced,
that's a great question.
In my opinion, I've experienced that where the pitch was perfect.
That's a great question.
The voice was absolutely an instrument, and I felt like it was a show. I can't judge, like, I don't know people's hearts. I can't put words into people's mouth. But so I wonder if that, and I've been in situations like that too before, where someone they weren't Michael Bolton. They were more like Tim McGraw.
Oh,
I cannot believe I just
shots fired.
No, I'm just saying.
Do you really want to go there?
I didn't want to go there. I just came out of my mouth before I could think. But no, I mean, you know, some people just have a beautiful voice. I mean, they don't need an instrument, because that is an instrument. But I wonder if it's possible, if he inhabits our praise, for him to say, I'm sitting this one out because your hearts are not with me. And do we ever experience that? Like, why is that? Like, you had the opposite happen. You know, you had the opposite happen.
I'm like, there's nothing going on here. And he's like, hold up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, you kind of alluded to the verse that says the Lord inhabits the praises of his people. And so when he inhabits the praises of his people, we don't always know whether that person is doing that for praises to God or for their own satisfaction. We don't always know that. But God does. He knows whether there's it's the praises of his people, or if it's just a song they're singing because they want to impress somebody. And so sometimes, you know, we don't know that. So I think what you're saying could be possible. Both what Eric is saying and what you're saying, I think both could be real life scenarios. The issue I think that I hear Eric talking about and Derek mentioning is what does it look like for us when we come into a situation? Can we praise him in any situation, no matter what the no matter if it meets our preferences or not?
Yeah.
So, and I'll say this: there's problematic things happening on church stages.
Yeah.
With worship. We're not to say that you can do no wrong, and like there's issues, there's real issues, there's stuff that's being sung that shouldn't be sung.
100%.
You know, so there is that. There's people up there who shouldn't be up there at times. That's, you know, I think there are, because Chris, you said you were talking about not wanting to judge a person's motives or whatever. There also is some level of discernment when you're in a scenario like the one that you described, where you said you really felt like that it was for show and that there wasn't much worship happening. It's okay for you to look at that and say there's not anything like. And to understand what's happening in that moment. The error that we get is where people take it that next step further and start to say that that's really what that person is all about, because we don't necessarily know. Like, you know, I had somebody approach me one time about a member of my team and saying that they're just up there for show. Their heart's not in it. And I knew the exact opposite was true. Now, maybe something had happened at one point and they felt like that or whatever, but to make that to make that sweeping judgment on the person themselves, I feel like is a little bit more dangerous. But you can go in and be like, you can sit through something and feel like, oh man, this, you know, God's not really in this. But at the same time, if it does feel like the person is, you know, up there just singing for themselves, God inhabiting the praises of his people is not dependent solely upon what is happening with the person who is holding the microphone.
That's cool.
You know, so there could be, I've had moments in leading in worship where I feel like I really was not connecting or leading well, but there were still people out there worshiping. Because it's not fully dependent upon me. You can still take it upon yourself to sing the words yourself, to have that moment of worship. And yes, maybe they were leading for the wrong reason that day or something like that. But we do still have that choice again.
So it's not quite like preaching, whereas everybody who preaches has purity of motive, right? So it's a little different. Is that what you're saying?
Episode.
So, yeah, everything we're applying here to the sincerity, to the, is it show, is it this, can apply on anything that's being done, not just musical worship.
Yes.
It can apply there across the board.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important, I think, with what you're saying, is that you can really end up just getting caught up in that and trying to make a decision about, oh, well, are they really up there worshiping God and all this stuff, whatever. And then before you know it, moment's gone.
Yeah.
You didn't do anything, and you just sat there trying to judge if that person was, doing it.
Yeah, it's you walk in and it's too loud. It's not loud enough. There's no energy. Why are there stage lights? Why is it dark in here? That person on the stage is moving too much. Like those are the kind of things that we get into those, and instead of focusing on having a heart of worship, we're making snap judgments like all over the room.
Instead of taking what Paul said in Philippians when he said about some preach the gospel out of impure motives, he said, but I praise God that whether false motives or not, the word of God is being preached. So for me, whether it's out of false motives and somebody is doing it for performance, somebody is doing it, if the name of Jesus is being honored and glorified, then Paul said, I rejoice that the gospel is being preached. Now, if the gospel is not being sung, that might be a different story there.
And that's kind of, there's some things that I referenced before.
That's right. That's what you were saying.
Be part
earlier.
of the problem. Sure.
That's right. Yeah.
And so, if you're singing a song that, feels like strictly unbiblical, there's a lot of churches out there that are not even singing, like they're opening a song with a song or two of, something that is completely not.
I mean, kind of like this song, God's going to get you for that. God's going to get you for that. For everything wrong thing that you do, He knows where you're at.
But yeah. I mean, we're talking about like the Billboard stuff. I mean, Chris, you talked about something that you.
I feel like I'm the resident preacher in the Hat Baptist. You know what I mean? Like I have to speak for all Baptists.
And that's part of the cross we must.
I'm fine because
that's part of the cross we must bear with the rest of us.
We bear it because I think we got a lot of things right.
Okay, gotcha.
So I don't mind speaking for us.
Here we go.
Okay, well, go ahead.
Can I
please?
finish?
Yes, please. But finish quickly if you don't mind.
Yeah. So as I've gotten older, I grew up in a Baptist church. We always had every Sunday, even recently. When I broke away from the Baptist church, we had a person who would sing a solo, and every single person looked forward because it was typically, one of three people in the church, right, that would sing, and they had their favorites.
Yeah.
But now as I've gotten older, I feel like we don't do that at the church we go to now. And I feel like it was almost, I'm probably being judgmental when I say this, but this is me looking back. I feel like that's when worship got turned off.
Okay.
Because then we just started watching someone up on and say, boy, that's so pretty. I'm not saying people can't work, like to your point. Who's to say what someone's sitting and how that's affecting them, and only God knows, and only you're responsible for it, right? But for me, it's like I felt like we were almost stargazing a little bit instead of like in it being corporate worship, and we all sing along and we're doing it. Like it takes participation if you want to have worship, right? Because you can't just watch and not be participating.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know what I just said, but it felt good.
Participation is vital in the term in corporate worship, and I think I'll just leave it at that. I mean, it's extremely important for you to choose to do it and not just observe others, Chris. Not just people watch.
Just the people watch. but okay. So this is a great segue, and I don't know where you're going with this because I'm not on the planning committee here. But I would say so. Then it's not a big jump to say somebody might say, I can't feel worshipful singing those songs because if it's not a connected song, like Steve, you love songs that some of us in this room don't particularly like, a style, you know what I mean? And that might be another night. I don't know what you got planned, but is it not possible to say, well, if you want to participate, at some point you have to feel or have a connection with that music? Or am I being shallow when I say that? Because that's one of those things I've heard people say.
Okay, for example, let's say, for example, the song that we sang recently at Grace and Truth, "Kneel at the Cross," that I sang. It's an old hymn. You may not like the music to that song. You may not like, but if you say "Kneel at the cross," Christ will meet you there. Come while He waits for you. You know, do you have to like the musical style? Do you have to like that to really gain some great sense of meaning from
I grew
what
up
the
on
song
the hymns.
says?
I'm a Baptist. I grew up on
understand that.
hymns.
I know that.
I got no problem with hymns.
Yeah, right.
What I'm saying is people that will say or have said, if I don't feel connected to a musical style, then how do I, that's my connection when it comes to, we're talking about music worship. So if my connection is this song, and I'm being devil's advocate here, I have my own thoughts about this, but would it not make sense for them to say, I don't feel connected to that song because A, I don't know it. Now, B, should I at least not try to get it by the third, verse? You know what I'm saying? Or they might say, I just don't feel that because it's not how I
Right. So
worship musically.
So you're using the wrong, your connector. You mentioned I don't connect with that. You're using the wrong connection piece, because what we're supposed to connect to is God, is lifting His name, right? Not how it's done, right? The goal is to worship Him. The how can be done all kinds of bunch of different ways.
All right. I get what you're saying, but let's be tangible for a minute. There are certain songs that you hear that move you. Maybe it's not spiritually, but at least emotionally more. It's just the way God made music.
Yeah. Sure.
You like this Benjamin Franklin. What's his name? That you just love everything. Ben
Hastings.
That's it. There's something about the way he writes you love. There might be a whole group of people like myself that don't know him from Adam's House Cat. You know what I mean? Right. What I'm saying is it possible for people to connect with certain songs and feel like that's equating it to a good moment in worship? And if I don't get that, I can't have a good moment in worship. These are great. I love that we're talking about it.
Music is one of the most uniquely personal things in the world. That is completely outside of worship and religion or anything like that. If you've ever ridden in the car with someone while they played through their playlist and you had, a moment of, what are we listening to? I can't stand this. Like I've had a couple moments like that, but styles can vary so richly between people. But I think kind of what you're talking about in the context of preference, we see that a lot in terms of people choosing a church. And I don't think we're necessarily talking about, where you're going to stay and worship long term. We're really just talking about those moments of worship. So you just walked into a church to, can you,
can I set aside my preference to join in corporate worship?
Because if you have a certain style of music that you enjoy, a certain style of preaching that you enjoy, you're going to be more likely to choose, if you're church shopping, sorry to put that in quotes, if you will, you're going to be more likely to choose a church that fits closer to your preference.
Yeah.
But that's not really I didn't feel like that's what we were discussing here.
Can you set aside your preferences to join in corporate worship? Can you set aside for 3.5 to 5 minutes that it's just a little bit too loud?
Because that applies
to join in corporate worship.
Yeah, because then that applies to just other stuff. And not just always thinking about like, well, I don't really like it this way, so, I'm not going to.
Right.
Well, if you don't adapt and adjust when it comes to preferences, you lose a richness, I think, across the board. So I was really burned out, and I was having difficulty back in the late 80s while working for Prison Fellowship. And I walked into a prison chapel one day for an event, and the prison choir got up and sang, "I'll say yes, Lord, yes, to your will and to your way." I don't think I'd ever heard that song before, that moment. But I can tell you the way that song impacted me, being sung by a group of prisoners when they sang a cappella, I'll say yes, Lord, yes, to your will and to your way. And as many of you who know me, I sung that song for the rest of my life, and I've tried to lead other people in it. Was it something that grew out of my experience or even my preferences? The answer is no. But in that moment, when you embrace it, when you do what you're talking about, Eric, it creates, I know I've had the privilege of being in a lot of different cultures and a lot of different cultural musics and participating in it. And I'm telling you, there's a richness to that that's just hard to beat. It is just really hard to beat.
I can almost hear the outro music playing now.
So one night at Grace and Truth Church on a New Year's Eve, we had all the way from Christian headbangers all the way to black gospel quartet and everything in between. And that was quite a night. Yeah. Do I like screaming, guys screaming and sliding all over the floor and that kind of thing? It's not my preference. But it was an event to be remembered. I'll never forget it.
So we used to sing a song at Grace and Truth a long time. No, not a long time ago. I mean, well, I guess it depends on what you consider 10 to 15 years ago. A song by Hillsong Worship called With Everything. And it says, with everything, we will shout for your glory. With everything that we have, we will shout forth your praise. So can we set aside our preferences to give everything that we have to shout forth his praise?
I can. I don't always do it, but I can.
For Derek and Steve, Chris behind the cameras, my name's Eric. This has been Preacher in the Hat. See you next time.